morning, guys. How are you guys doing? So we are going to keep reading The Thief of Always. We left off on chapter 3. Harvey has just arrived at the holiday house. Chapter 3 is called Pleasure and the Worry. And here's the picture that goes with it. What a fine thing it would be, Harvey thought, to build a place like this, to drive its foundations deep into the earth, to lay its floors and hoist its walls, to say, where there was nothing, I raised a house. That would be a very fine thing. It wasn't a puffed-up peacock of a place either. There were no marble steps, no fluted columns. It was a proud house, certainly, but there was nothing wrong with that. It had much to be proud of. It stood 4 stories high and boasted more windows than Harvey could readily count. Its porch was wide, as were the steps that led up to its carved front door. Its slated roofs were steep and crowned with magnificent chimneys and lightning rods. Its highest point, however, was neither a chimney nor a lightning rod, but a large and elaborately wrought weather vane, which Harvey was peering up at when he heard the front door open and a voice say, "Harvey Swick, as I live and breathe." He looked down, the weather vane's white silhouette still behind his eyes, and there on the porch stood a woman who made his grandmother, the oldest person he knew, look young. She had a face like a rolled-up ball of cobwebs, from which her hair, which could have been spider's work, fell in wispy abundance. Her eyes were tiny, her mouth tight, her hands gnarled. Her voice, however, was melodious, and its words welcoming. "I thought maybe you decided not to come," she said, picking up a basket of freshly cut flowers she'd left on the step. "Which would have been a pity. Come on in. There's food on the table. You must be famished." "I can't stay long," Harvey said. "You must do whatever you wish," came the reply. "I'm Mrs. Griffin, by the way." "Yes, Rick just mentioned you." "I hope he didn't bend your ear too much. He loves the sound of his own voice. That and his reflection." Harvey had climbed the porch steps by now and stopped in front of the open door. This was a moment of decision, he knew, though he wasn't quite sure why. "Step inside," Mrs. Griffin said, brushing a spider hair back from her furrowed brow. But Harvey still hesitated, and he might have turned around and never stepped inside the house, except that he heard a boy's voice yelling, "I gotcha! I gotcha!" followed by uproarious laughter. "Wendell," Mrs. Griffin said, "are you chasing the cats again?" The sound of laughter grew even louder, and it was so full of good humor that Harvey stepped over the threshold and into the house just so that he could see the face of its owner. He only got a brief look. A goofy, bespectacled face appeared for a moment at the other end of the hallway. Then a piebald cat dashed between the boy's legs, and he was off after it, yelling and laughing again. "He's such a crazy boy," Mrs. Griffin said, "but all the cats love him." The house was more wonderful inside than out. Even on the short journey to the kitchen, Harvey glimpsed enough to know that this was a place built for games, chases, and adventures. It was a maze in which no 2 doors were alike. It was a treasure house where some notorious pirate had hidden his blood-stained booty. It was a resting place for carpets flown by genies and boxes sealed before the flood, where the eggs of beasts that the earth had lost were wrapped and waiting for the sun's heat to hatch them. "It's perfect," Harvey murmured to himself. Mrs. Griffin caught his words. "Nothing's perfect," she replied. "Why not?" "Because time passes," she went on, staring down at the flowers she had cut, "and the beetle and the worm find their way into everything sooner or later." Hearing this, Harvey wondered what grief it was Mrs. Griffin had known or seen to make her so mournful. "I'm sorry," she said, covering her melancholy with a tiny smile. "You didn't come here to listen to my dirges. You came to enjoy yourself, didn't you?" "I guess so," said Harvey. "So let me tempt you with some treats." Harvey sat himself down at the kitchen table, and within 60 seconds, Mrs. Griffin had set a dozen plates of food in front of him. Hamburgers, hot dogs and fried chicken, mounds of buttered potatoes, apple, cherry, and mud pies, ice cream and whipped cream, grapes, tangerines, and a plate of fruits he couldn't even name. He set to eating with gusto and was devouring his second slice of pie when a freckled girl with long, frizzy blonde hair and huge blue-green eyes ambled in. "You must be Harvey," she said. "How did you know?" Wendell told me. How did he know? She shrugged. He just heard. I'm Lulu, by the way. Did you just arrive? No, I've been here for ages. Longer than Wendell, but not as long as Mrs. Griffin. Nobody's been here as long as she has. Isn't that right? Almost, said Mrs. Griffin, a little mysteriously. Do you want something to eat, sweetie? Lulu shook her head. No, thanks. I haven't got much of an appetite at the moment. She nevertheless sat down opposite Harvey, stuck her thumb in the mud pie, and licked it clean. Who invited you here? She asked. A guy called Rictus? Oh, yeah, the one with the grin? That's him. He's got a sister and 2 brothers, she went on. You've met them, then? Not all of them, Lulu admitted. They keep themselves to themselves, but you'll meet 1 or 2 of them sooner or later. I don't think I'll be staying, Harvey said. I mean, my mom and dad don't even know I'm here. Sure they do, Lulu replied. They just didn't tell you about it. This confused Harvey, and he said so. Call your mom and dad, Lulu suggested. Ask them. Can I do that, he wondered. Of course you can, Mrs. Griffin replied. The phone's in the hallway. Carrying a spoonful of ice cream with him, Harvey went to the phone and dialed. At first, there was a whining sound on the line, as though a wind were in the wires. Then, as it cleared, he heard his mom say, Who is this? Before you start yelling, he began. Oh, honey, his mom cooed. Did you arrive? Arrive? You are at the holiday house, I hope. Yes, I am, but... Oh, good. I was worried maybe you'd lost your way. Do you like it there? You knew I was coming, Harvey said, catching Lulu's eyes. I told you, she mouthed. Of course we knew, his mom went on. We invited Mr. Rictus to show you the place. You look so sad, you poor lamb. We thought you needed a little fun. Really? Said Harvey, astonished by this turn of events. We want you to enjoy yourselves, his mom went on, so you stay just as long as you want. What about school? He asked. You deserve a little time off, came the reply. Don't you worry about anything. Just have a good time. I will, Mom. Bye, honey. Bye. Harvey came away from the conversation, shaking his head in amazement. You were right, he said to Lulu. They arranged everything. So now you don't have to feel guilty, said Lulu. Well, I guess I'll see you around later, huh? And with that, she ambled away. If you're finished eating, Mrs. Griffin said, I'll show you to your room. I'd like that. She duly led Harvey up the stairs. At the landing, basking in the sun-drenched windowsill, was a cat with fur the color of the cloudless sky. That's Blue Cat, Mrs. Griffin said. You saw Stew Cat playing with Wendell. I don't know where Clue Cat is, but he'll find you. He likes new guests. Do you have a lot of people coming here? Only children. Very special children like you and Lulu and Wendell. Mr. Hood won't have just anybody. Who's Mr. Hood? The man who built the holiday house, Mrs. Griffin replied. Will I meet him too? Mrs. Griffin looked discomfited by the question. Maybe, she said, her eyes averted. But he's a very private man. They were up on the landing by now, and Mrs. Griffin led Harvey past a row of painted portraits to a room at the back of the house. It overlooked an orchard, and the warm air carried the smell of ripe apples into the room. You look tired, my sweet, Mrs. Griffin said. Maybe you should lie down for a while. Harvey usually hated to sleep in the afternoon. It reminded him too much of having the flu, or the measles. But the pillow looked very cool and comfortable, and when Mrs. Griffin had taken her leave, he decided to lie down, just for a few minutes. Either he was more tired than he'd thought, or the calm and comfort of the house rocked him into a slumber. Whichever, his eyes closed almost as soon as he put his head on the pillow, and they did not open again until morning. Chapter 4, A Death Between Seasons. And there's the picture. The sun came to wake him soon after dawn. A strange white dart of light laid on his lids. He sat up with a start, wondering for a moment what bed this was, what room, what house. Then his memories of the previous day returned, and he realized that he had slept from late afternoon into early morning. The rest had strengthened him. He felt energetic, and with a whoop of pleasure, he jumped out of bed and got dressed. The house was more welcoming than ever today. The flowers Mrs. Griffin had set on every table and sill singing with color. The front door stood open, and sliding down the gleaming banisters, Harvey raced out onto the porch to inspect the morning. A surprise awaited him. The trees, which had been heavy with leaves the previous afternoon, had shed their canopies. There were tiny new buds on every branch and twig, as though this were the first day of spring. "Another day, another $1," said Wendell, ambling around the corner of the house. "What does that mean?" said Harvey. "It's what my father used to say all the time. Another day, another $1. He's a banker, my dad. Wendell Hamilton II. And me, I'm Wendell Hamilton III. How'd you know?" "Lucky guess. I'm Harvey." "Yeah, I know. Do you like tree houses?" "I've never had one." Wendell pointed up at the tallest tree. There was a platform perched up among the branches, with a rudimentary house built upon it. "I've been working up there for weeks," said Wendell, "but I can't get it finished alone. You want to help me?" "Sure, but I've got to eat something first." "Go eat. I'll be around." Harvey headed back inside and found Mrs. Griffin setting out a breakfast fit for a prince. There was milk spilt on the floor, and a cat with a tail hooked like a question mark, lapping it up. "Clue Cat," he said. "Yes, indeed," Mrs. Griffin said fondly. "He's the wicked one." Clue Cat looked up as if he knew he was being talked about. Then he jumped up onto the table and searched among the plates of pancakes and waffles for something more to eat. "Can he do whatever he likes?" Harvey said, watching the cat sniff at this and that. "I mean, does nobody control him?" Well, we all have... Sorry, that's my cat. Well, we all have somebody watching over us, don't we?" Mrs. Griffin replied, "whether we like it or not. Now eat. You've got some wonderful times ahead of you." Harvey didn't need a second invitation. He dug into his second meal at the holiday house with even more appetite than he had at the first, and then headed out to meet the day. Oh, what a day it was. The breeze was warm, and smelled of the green scent of growing things. The perfect sky was full of swooping birds. He sauntered through the grass, his hands in his pockets, like the lord of all he surveyed, calling to Wendell as he approached the trees. "Can I come up?" "If you've got a head for heights," Wendell dared him. The ladder creaked as he climbed, but he made the platform without missing a step. Wendell was impressed. "Not bad for a new boy," he said. "We had 2 kids here who couldn't even get halfway up." Sorry. I'm Mary Lewis. That's my cat, Lewis. "Not bad for a new boy," he said. "We had 2 cats here who couldn't even get halfway up." "Where'd they go?" "Back home, I suppose. Kids come and go, you know." Harvey peered out through the branches, upon which every bud was bursting. "You can't see much, can you?" he said. "I mean, there's no sign of the town at all." "Who cares?" said Wendell. "It's just gray out there anyway." "And it's sunny here," Harvey said, staring down at the wall of misty stones that divided the grounds of the house from the outside world. "How's that possible?" Wendell's answer was the same again. "Who cares?" he said. "I know I don't. Now, are we going to start building or what?" They spent the next 2 hours working on the treehouse, descending a dozen times to dig through the timbers heaped beside the orchard, looking for boards to finish their repairs. By noon, they not only found enough wood to fix the roof, but they had each found a friend. Harvey liked Wendell's bad jokes, and that "who cares," which found its way into every other sentence. My cat is going to drive me nuts, guys. And Wendell seemed just as happy to have Harvey's company. "You're the first kid who's been real fun," he said. "What about Lulu?" "What about her?" "Isn't she any fun?" "She was okay when I first arrived," Wendell admitted. "I mean, she's been here months, so she kind of showed me the place. But she's gotten weird the last few days. I see her sometimes wandering around like she's sleepwalking, with a blank expression on her face." "She's probably going crazy," Harvey said. "Her brain's turning to mush." "Do you know about that stuff?" Wendell wanted to know, his face lighting up with ghoulish delight. "Sure I do," Harvey lied. "My dad's a surgeon." Wendell was most impressed by this. and for the next few minutes listened in gaping envy as Harvey told him about all of the operations he had seen: skulls sawn open and legs sawn off, feet sewn on where hands should be, and a man with a boil on his behind that grew into a talking head. "You swear?" said Wendell. "I swear," said Harvey. "That's so cool." All this talk brought on a fierce hunger, and at Wendell's suggestion, they climbed down the ladder and wandered into the house to eat. "What do you want to do this afternoon?" he asked Harvey as they sat down at the table. "It's going to be real hot. It always is." "Is there anywhere we can swim?" Wendell frowned. "Well, yes," he said doubtfully. "There's a lake out around the other side of the house, but you won't like it." "Why not?" "The water's so deep you can't even see the bottom." "Are there any fish?" "Oh, sure." "Maybe we can catch some. Mrs. Griffin could cook 'em up for us." At this, Mrs. Griffin, who was at the stove piling up a plate with onion rings, gave a little shout and dropped the plate. She turned to Harvey, her face ashen. "You don't want to do that," she said. "Why not?" Harvey replied. "I thought I could do whatever I wanted." "Well, yes, of course you can," she told him. "But I wouldn't want you to get sick. The fish are poisonous, you see." "Oh," said Harvey. "Well, maybe we won't eat them after all." "Look at this mess," Mrs. Griffin said, fussing to cover her confusion. "I need a new apron." She hurried away to fetch one, leaving Harvey and Wendell to exchange puzzled looks. "Now I really have to see these fish," Harvey said. As he spoke, the ever-inquisitive Clue Cat jumped up onto the counter beside the stove, and before either of the boys could move to stop him, he had his paws on the lip of one of the pans. "Hey, get down," Harvey told him. The cat didn't care to take orders. He hoisted himself up onto the rim of the pan to sniff at its contents, his tail flicking back and forth. The next moment, disaster. The tail danced too close to one of the burners and burst into flames. Clue Cat yowled and tipped over the pan he was perched on. A wave of boiling water washed him off the top of the stove, and he fell to the ground in a smoking heap. Whether drowned, scalded, or incinerated, the end was the same. He hit the floor dead. The din brought Mrs. Griffin hurrying back. "I think I'm going to go eat outside," Wendell said, as the old woman appeared at the door. He snatched up a couple of hot dogs and was gone. "Oh, my Lord!" Mrs. Griffin cried when she set sight on the dead cat. "Oh, you foolish thing!" "It was an accident," Harvey said, sickened by what had happened. "He was up on the stove." Foolish thing, was all Mrs. Griffin seemed to say. She sank down onto her knees and stared at the sad little sack of burned fur. "No more questions from you," she finally murmured. The sight of Mrs. Griffin's unhappiness made Harvey's eyes sting, but he hated to have anyone see him cry, so he fought back his tears as best he could and said, "Shall I help you bury him?" in his gruffest voice. Mrs. Griffin looked around. "That's very sweet of you," she said softly, "but there's no need. You go out and play." "I don't want to leave you on your own," Harvey said. "Oh, look at you, child," Mrs. Griffin said. "You've got tears on your cheeks." Harvey blushed and wiped them away with the back of his hand. "Don't be ashamed to weep," Mrs. Griffin said. "It's a wonderful thing. I wish I could still shed a tear or two." "You're sad," Harvey said. "I can see that." "What I feel is not quite sadness," Mrs. Griffin replied. "And it's not much solace either, I'm afraid." "What's solace?" Harvey asked. It's something soothing," Mrs. Griffin said, getting to her feet. "Something that heals the pain in your heart." "And you don't have any of that?" "No, I don't," Mrs. Griffin said. She reached out and touched Harvey's cheek. "Except maybe in these tears of yours. They comfort me." She sighed as she traced their tracks with her fingers. "Your tears are sweet, child, and so are you. Now you go out into the light and enjoy yourself. There's sun on the step, and it won't be there forever, believe me." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "I'll see you later then," Harvey said, and headed out into the afternoon. Okay, we're gonna stop there, guys. I'm sorry that my cat kept getting in the way. I can show you him. This is my kitty. He spent most of the time swatting at me while we were and wanting to play while I was reading. But anyways, I hope you guys are doing well. Take care. I'll put the next video up tomorrow, guys. Bye.